This is a production of Cornell University.
Hi, thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and thank you all for staying a bit past time to listen to my talk. I'm excited to share current progress on this project to integrate multimodal proximal remote sensing data for improved predictions of agronomically important crop traits. So Malin gave a very nice introduction to high throughput phenotyping and why we might want to deploy this. Because of those advantages, the implementation and variety of high throughput sensors and platforms has increased in recent years. And as prohibitive costs go down and additional sensors are developed, this trend is likely to continue. So with this comes the need to analyze large amounts of new and often complex and high dimensional data. So here I'm going to focus on two such sensors and platforms. The first is a multispectral camera, which has been deployed on unoccupied aerial vehicles, so the drone pictured there. The camera that we are using captures 5 different bands and allows us to capture information on canopy level spectral information. The second is a lidar camera deployed on unoccupied ground vehicles. So the little ground rover car robot in the photo there. Lidar scans yield 3D reconstructions of entire plots, and in this way allow us to capture sub-canopy architectural information. So multispectral images are typically used to calculate vegetation indices. LiDAR scans, which are used to generate point clouds, are used to extract plant height and stem width as 2 common examples. But despite the fact that these sensors capture unique spatial and structural information, they are often used separately. So our goal here is to integrate the UAV multispectral images with the UGV LiDAR point clouds. And we aim to do this by using machine learning methods to extract latent phenotypes. And these latent phenotypes will be used to then predict phenotypes of interest, such as grain yield. So we're doing this for the data collected through the Genomes to Fields project, which collects data for maize hybrids up at Musgrave Research Farm in Aurora. And we have rover and drone data collected over the past 5 years. So a little bit more background. The rover here has typical RGB cameras, and then the LiDAR camera is on the back of the rover here. These are 2-row plots, so we drive the rover in between those 2 rows. And in the resulting point clouds pictured in these 2 images here, you can see the row on the left and the row on the right. Now these point clouds are also capturing points in adjacent plots. So ultimately, we crop those to generate this final point cloud here. Each point in the point cloud contains an X, Y, and a Z coordinate, giving the positional, relative position of that point to the rover. This cropped point cloud here still has about 250,000 points in it. The multispectral camera is deployed on the bottom of the drone here, and an example of a single plot level image is shown on the right. This image has been printed separately for each band. For visualization, you can think of the resulting image as a stack of all 5 of these. So as the drone flies over the field, it takes images at fixed points. These raw images have about 80% overlap. In order to overlay them, we use a software called Pix4D to generate this final orthomosaic image. To then split the orthomosaic up by plot, we use image breeders developed by Nick Morales in the Robbins lab. And that allows us to draw bounding boxes around each of the plots and ultimately arrive at these plot level images. So now that we have plot level images and plot level point clouds, how do we actually extract these latent phenotypes? So we started with the multispectral images and trained what is called an autoencoder model. So an autoencoder is an unsupervised machine learning model which takes the original images, passes them through a neural network to produce the latent codes Z. The latent phenotypes, the latent codes, are then passed through a second neural network, the decoder, to reproduce the original image. And this model is optimized such that the difference between the reconstruction and the original image is minimized. Once the model is trained, we can then pass all images through the encoder and extract these latent codes. So you can think of an autoencoder model similar to principal component analysis. We are performing dimensionality reduction here, learning these latent representations, removing noise. But in contrast to NDVI or plant height, we're allowing the machine to learn the important features. In this context, we start from original images that are 5-band, 396 pixels tall and 94 pixels wide, so about 185,000 values, and reducing them to a vector of length 256. So this shows results from an initial test to overfit on a single multispectral image and see if we could fully reconstruct the original image from latent codes. From there, we scaled up to training on 10 different dates, so about 5,000 multispectral images from the G2F fields in 2020. And you can see that though the reconstruction from the test set is blurrier, the model is still able to nearly reconstruct the original image. So now we've shown that the latent vectors are an efficient representation and capture the relevant and necessary information to reconstruct the original images. So the next thing that we wanted to do was start investigating these latent phenotypes to see what kinds of information was contained within them. So we started by doing a PCA on the latent vectors. So this is for all 5,000 images, and colored them by days after planting here and NDVI over here. And we do see clustering in both of these. So the next thing that we did is to take the first 25 of those principal components, which explain about 45% of the total variation. And we performed linear regression to predict the NDVI values from those principal components. So in this figure here, we have the actual NDVI values on the x-axis and the predicted NDVI values on the y-axis. And the correlation between those was 0.89. So this tells us that not only are the latent codes reduced representations of the multispectral images, they also contain biologically relevant information. So our next steps are to further investigate those latent phenotypes, develop and implement a second model for the point clouds. And we're looking into potential model architectures currently. And then ultimately, we will extract latent codes from both the multispectral images and the point clouds to predict our phenotypes of interest. So I'd like to thank my committee members, Liam and folks from the Buckler Lab for collecting this data, as well as Abe Davis, Peter Michael, and Joe Gage for their assistance and guidance with implementing this model. And I'm happy to take questions this time. Thank you so much.
What's up, Erin? I'm curious if as opposed to doing like a regression on the 25 PC, if you just try regressing on all 256 dimensions of the latent space, like a timeline.
Yes. So we did some classification and regression tasks on the latent codes initially. We don't see too much improved performance, but it also doesn't reduce the performance. So similar to taking from the principal components, taking all 256 of those, for example, increasing that number doesn't tend to increase the performance. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So not as familiar with the ground lidar, but on those days of where you do imaging, is it possible to use like calibration images to maybe reduce the error, or can you just infer that from the images themselves?
On the lidar point clouds?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah, so we have the calibration panels to account for lighting and things like that with multispectral images. There's not an analogous kind of calibration metric. So concerns with that, whereas like lighting might be a concern for multispectral images, you'll have some kind of random variation for wind, things like that as you're driving through on different days or at different times. So hopefully, I think the goal is that the autoencoder model will be able to kind of parse out that noise. Mm-hmm. Yes.
In the ground rover calculate humidity, should it measure humidity or temperature?
No, so yeah, at this point, so the question was if the ground rover can calculate humidity or canopy temperature. So the only information that we're gaining from the point clouds is the positional information. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you all so much.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.